Okay, issue 3, COVID politics.
More than 160,000 Americans have now died under the coronavirus 19 pandemic, but Republicans and Democrats remain deadlocked on a second bailout agreement to provide financial aid to those in need. The White House and Senate Republicans say Democrats are demanding excessive funding for matters unrelated to the pandemic. Democrats say Republicans are thinking too small, unwilling to provide necessary support. And around the world, the virus continues to wreak havoc, with Europe suffering a spike in new infections.
Clarence, obviously President Trump as well is insisting that Democrats are wrong to push for funding for mail-in ballots. But how do you see these negotiations playing out as the election draws closer and feasibly the partisan battle lines become more calcified?
Well, I think it's going to come down to the swing voters in the end, which is typically the case. I think the picture that those folks are still making up their minds, the picture that they're seeing is not that great. We were just talking before the show about how we miss the studio we used to do this show in. Remember those days? We can't do it now. We all work from home, and a lot of folks feel that way across the country. Grandmothers can't see their grandkids, and that alone is enough to bring down a presidency, I think. So that's really what I think is going to play out.
Tiana, your thoughts?
I mean, right now, the biggest cost right now to Trump's odds for re-election is the flip-flopping on the masks. You know, we knew it was a respiratory disease. We knew it was probably airborne. French doctors in the 1700s were able to figure out that wearing a mask helps you not transmit airborne respiratory disease. And yet, for 2 months, the supposed experts, including Fauci, including Trump's handpicked Surgeon General, they were lying about masks. And they later on admitted as much because they said they were trying to make sure that there were enough masks. That was clearly never a problem. And now we're sort of bearing the cost of that burden. So whenever Democrats talk about, oh, this is the Trump virus, really the only thing you can blame him on is the mask issue. The Trump administration did adequately find PPE. They did make sure that there were ventilators. So playing politics with the relief for ordinary Americans just makes no sense, especially when you already see that a lot of the Republican establishment is willing to go with big government spending plans. I mean, these are already record deficits that we're talking about. And we're saying that X trillion dollars isn't enough. Make sure the unemployment insurance doesn't expire while we're in budget negotiations. And look at the fact that PPP, while expensive, was quite successful in the restoration of jobs. This should be a bipartisan affair, focusing on the welfare of the public because of a shutdown that the government mandated.
Eleanor.
I'm not even going to bother to refute the various comments made there. Nobody is blaming Trump for the virus. They are faulting him for the way he's handling it. It is an epic failure of leadership, compounded by an epic failure to recognize the social justice movement going on in this country as well. So we're going to talk about his prospect for re-election. I can't find a single poll that is good news for him. And I think the worry is, what might he do to try to manipulate the results? And starving the post office of money is one way he's trying to manipulate the results. And I think the Democrats are standing firm on the COVID relief bill. It's got to include money for it's got to include money for states and cities as well. I think it's a game of chicken that is pretty deadly for both sides and deadly for the people around this country who are counting on this relief. But I fail to understand how it helps the Trump administration or how it helps the Republicans maintain the Senate. You've got Republican senators running for re-election who are begging for more relief. They don't want to go home and explain why that's not there. So I think the polls will tighten. They inevitably do, but I would much rather be Biden and Harris today than Trump and Pence.
Pat, to Eleanor's point, there is a challenge for Republicans that, that the polls do not look good in terms of certainly the House, but the presidency and the Senate. Is there a possibility that, Republican senators, in these tight races are going to say to the president, Mr. President, do you want a Republican Senate?
Well, I think a number of them will, certainly, but I will say this. the center of gravity up on Capitol Hill, which was with Pelosi and the Democrats a while ago, I thought the Republicans had to come to them, has shifted, Tom. One of the reasons is you got some hardline senators who are saying, look, we're not going to try to spend ourselves out of this depression and destroy the economy. We believe in our principles. We're going to stand firm. The pressure is now on Pelosi. The Republicans have said, we'll go to 1 trillion. And Pelosi, who started at 3.4 trillion, will not even come back to 2 trillion. In other words, she's holding off 1 trillion to help unemployed folks and other folks to demand it to go to $2 trillion. I don't think it's going to happen. And I'll tell you, the pressure is coming from the states and the cities whose budgets need this cash, and Trump is willing to withhold it. So I think Trump and the other guys are playing hardball now. Moreover, they've adopted the position that the way to win this election is to be for play ball, if you will. Open the schools. We're going to have problems. Move forward on this. And the Democratic Party is becoming the party simply of stay in place, hide in your basement and masks and all the rest of it. So I don't think that in long term, that the trajectory of the Republican Party is wrong, as long as they're going forward with what they believe and are driving as hard as they can.
I hear echoes of Herbert Hoover already, because the fact of the matter is the public. Many people out here are on the brink of eviction or getting evicted. You've got people, single moms trying to take care of their families, and all of a sudden you want to cut them down from 600 to 200. I mean, I know how it's easy for us here in Washington to make these little calculations on paper, but we're talking about real lives out there. And in an election year, I think something happened with the old rule book about politics. So right before an election, you go and cut people's bread and water. This makes no sense to me.
Right.
Eleanor, you were going to jump in there?
I was going to ask Pat. He said that the Republican senators are defending their principles. What exactly are those principles? You're not going to tell me deficit reduction.
No, I will say this. There's no doubt about it. They said when we had the crisis, like the crisis of 2008, 2009, you got to throw the rule book out. We need to save the economy, save all these things. But once you do that, then you're going on and say, look, let's bail out the state of Illinois, which, voted trillions of dollars in pensions that it couldn't afford because the national taxpayers.
That's not what Democrats are asking for.
Time's come to say no. Clarence, there is a point where you've got to say, look, we've done enough, and now, we're not going to keep doing this on and on because we think we'll bankrupt the country, and we don't think that's the way out.
Red states are begging for relief too.
Clarence and the rest of the Tribune editorial board have said, do not bail out the state legislatures. They don't deserve it. But we're talking about regular, ordinary people out here who, through no fault of their own, are all of a sudden gone from having enough food to put on the table to having nothing.
You can get something from Trump. You just can't get everything Pelosi wants. Why not give him something?
All right,
Trump is trying to do it by executive order. That's ridiculous.
Let's bring in Tiana.
So, even the most hawkish of congressmen, including folks like Justin Amash, are all willing to acknowledge that Congress owes Americans individually direct cash payments simply because this is a manufactured recession. This was not something that happened because of some underlying problem with the economy or some sort of market correction. No, this is because the government forced everyone to stop working. And so as a result, those direct cash payments are good. We saw it in our Q2 GDP report. Spending on goods is still strong. People still have underlying demand. And remember, we came from one of the best economy in generations. As recently as February, we were talking about half-century low unemployment, the first real wage growth in a decade, disproportionately for women and minorities. The economy was strong, the labor market was tight. We can call it the Obama-Trump economy. It's both. Both deserve credit. Mind you, in the Obama days, the recovery was the slowest since World War II, which sped up during the Trump era. But the point is the underlying fundamentals were strong. So if we give cash back to individual workers, they will spend it, they will invest it, they will use it wisely. The main issue is, what about all of the waste? We gave $25 billion to airlines, and we didn't even put in a mandate that they had to make sure that they leave middle seats open for basic social distancing. Things that would have gotten you arrested anywhere in April, airlines were allowed to do, and they got $25 billion of taxpayer funding from it. I think that's what Americans are sick of. They're sick of holding up these corrupt crony industries. And that's not capitalism, that's cronyism.
Who owns the pandemic economy? According to you, it would be Dr. Fauci, I guess.
There you go.
I mean, he's part of the Trump administration. Trump
Yeah,
chose
I know,
to listen
right?
to Fauci. Ultimately, the buck stopped with
I'm
Trump.
a fan of Dr. Fauci, for the record, just so my sarcasm doesn't get misunderstood.
No, but anything Fauci did is Trump's to own. Trump decided to appoint him to the council. He didn't have to. He didn't have to listen to him.
And
But it's
Eleanor,
just
do you-
Decider.
Pat, do you want to come in?
Well, I agree. That's the ultimately Trump is the decider, and the big problem Trump's got, and I think some of us really fear, is they're opening up these schools, and a lot of these kids are going back in these open schools. I think you're going to get news stories coming in September and October. 10 kids in this class came up sick, and the school is shut down, and this is so demoralizing and depressing. It's a bad mood for the country to be in when it's going into an election for the incumbents.
It's in Georgia, and schools are opening up already, and there have been 1,200 infections, and they've shut down the schools. We should be surprised about this. This was pretty inevitable.
Kids shut down forever, Eleanor.
Yeah, but they shut them down until that while they quarantine people. And you need help from the federal government for the facilities to improve ventilation. They need help opening up, just like businesses need opening up. Help.
Okay.
The federal government could facilitate the opening of schools if that's what they want. Just tweeting it and saying it doesn't make it happen safely.
He doesn't. He's not a dictator as much
he
as
is.
you
He's
might try
acting
to
like
impress
one.
him.
All right. Well, let's end on that note and give a little shout out, whether it's a good shout out or a bad shout out, to Vladimir Putin for winning the coronavirus vaccine race, but based on the Russian experience with various other chemical agents, we'll judge
I'd
that.
run it through some more tests first.